Welcome to Spooky History. In today's episode, we're getting ghostly with the Greenbrier ghost. I may not be a parent, but most agree there can't possibly be anything much worse than losing a child. The grief of a mother who'd carried and raised them, assuming they'd outlive her. Consider the grief of one such mother, Mary Jane Hester, as she stood, watching them fill in the grave of her beloved daughter Zona, resident of Greenbrier County, West Virginia. Death is the end, so we all assume. Not for her broken-hearted mother, as she stands there exhaling white clouds into cold January air. As far as she's concerned, this story is not over yet. Elva Zona Hester, born around 1873. One day in October 1896, she met a newcomer to the community, blacksmith Erasmus Stribling Trout Shoe. Whirlwind romance or not, they were married shortly after. Zona, a young woman either easily fooled or whose hasty elopement testified to an eerily persuasive character in her new husband. As of then, she had less than 5 months to live. 3rd of January, 1897. For some reason, Mr. Shue, her husband, had specifically sent an errand boy to their house while he was out at work. Zona's lifeless body was lying at the bottom of the stairs, with her ankles neatly together and resting a hand on her middle. The kid gallivanted off to his mama, who sent for the doctor. Now, back then the local doctor was also the coroner. The man in question was a George W. Knapp, who took nearly an hour to arrive, leaving Mr. Shue plenty of time to not only mess up the death scene by moving her body upstairs and laying her on the bed, but dressing and washing the body himself, which was just not done back then, except traditionally by the local women. Oh, such a loving and grieving husband, eh? So distraught was he, in fact, that he barely allowed the Dr. Knapp to get a word in edgeways or a decent examination of the corpse. The fuss he put up, not letting the doctor touch his dead wife's head because he was too busy holding it and sobbing out his grief. Even dressing her in a high-necked collar and covering her face with a veil. None must touch his precious dead wife. Not even Dr. Punctual himself, Knapp, and when the doctor sees hints of bruising on the neck, naturally he leans in for a closer look. Oh dear. Big note from the husband there, who goes ape at the doctor, who is forced to conclude an examination he barely managed to start and leaves. Cause of death, Knapp wrote down, everlasting faint. How's that for vagueness? Interestingly, he later altered it to childbirth because apparently a fortnight previous he'd been treating her for what these learned men subtly referred to as female trouble. Her widower husband's behaviour just got weirder throughout the funeral. He bounced from super sad to hyper-energetic. At the wake, the corpse was laid out and he insisted on keeping vigil by it, even tying a scarf around the neck, sobbing that it had been her favourite. Poor, poor man. Oh, such grief. So grieved, he wouldn't even let anyone come near the body. Must have just been a trick of the light that some noticed how oddly loose Zona's head appeared. Difficult to get a proper look, though, when the wailing widower won't let anyone near it, eh? Funny, he couldn't be parted from her dead side, yet he later refused to keep the blanket that covered her body after the burial. Instead, Mary, her mother, took it home to the wash basin. The moment she dropped it in, the water turned to blood. Once it cleared, the pink stain could never be removed from the linen. It's a myth, ancient as the hills. A corpse only bleeds when it's got something to tell you, something important. Now, it happens to be a fact that Mary Jane Hester had disliked her son-in-law from the very moment she met him. Furthermore, upon news of Zona's death, allegedly Mary's first reply was, "The devil has killed her." But what could she do? How do you prove a mere suspicion without solid grounds? 4 weeks of agonised praying went by before finally, nighttime. Mary tosses and turns in her bed. She dreams. Or does she? For suddenly bright light fills the room. The air turns deathly cold. Mary shivers as before her horrified, closed eyes, the bright light slowly sinks down to the outline of a figure. An unmistakable figure she's mourned these 4 weeks, and it spoke. That the husband was cruel, the husband was violent, the husband had flown at her in a rage. How had he killed poor Zona? That's when the spectre's head slowly swiveled around, facing backwards. 4 nights this same dream went on. Mary Hester could bear no more. Soon afterwards, Dr. Knapp had a knock on his front door. Instead of a patient, before him stood none other than the local prosecutor, John Alfred Preston. He wanted to know about the late Mrs. Zona Shue. It was during this visit Dr. Knapp was forced to admit he had not conducted a complete examination of the body. Don't ask me whether Preston believed in ghosts, but Zona's mother had somehow convinced him to reopen the case. Already word was spreading and suspicions rising about her death. Armed with Dr. Knapp's statement and those of wary locals, Preston now had the legal power to order an exhumation for autopsy and form an inquest jury. This time, it was going to be done properly. And so it was. Starting the 22nd of February 1897, the autopsy lasted 3 days. By March 9th, the results were in. The discovery was made that the neck was broken and the windpipe mashed. On the throat were the marks of fingers indicating that she had been choked. The neck was dislocated between the first and second vertebrae. The ligaments were torn and ruptured. The windpipe had been crushed at a point in front of the neck. Shue was arrested, and whilst awaiting trial at Louisburg jail, inquiries unravelled a less than settling history. Zona had been his 3rd wife. The first divorced him on grounds of brutal violence. The second, dead in unexplained circumstances. They hadn't even been married a year. Shue certainly had some psychotic brass neck. Super confident of acquittal, he openly talked in jail about wanting to have had 7 wives before his death. During the trial, Mary's ghostly visitations came to light. No doubt the defence lawyer had a field day with that, and probably thought he was on a home run to win the case against this crazed mother. Well, the lawyers and judge may not have believed in ghosts, but the jury, however. Yep, they found Shue guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison in West Virginia State Penitentiary, narrowly avoiding a local lynch mob who wanted the killer hanged. Not that he lasted long anyway, dying from sickness 3 years later. Zona was never heard from beyond the grave again. All you'll see of her now is a state historical marker erected in a cemetery in West Virginia where her remains lie buried, presumably in peace, for now. Interred in a nearby cemetery is Zona Hester Shue. Her death in 1897 was presumably natural until her spirit appeared to her mother to describe how she was killed by her husband, Edward. Autopsy on the exhumed body verified the apparition's account, and Edward, found guilty of murder, was sentenced to the state prison, the only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer. We hope you enjoyed that episode of Spooky History. You can find us on most social media at Spooky Hist Show, and you can donate to us at paypal.com/noisyghostend. Thanks for watching, and please do have nightmares. Goodbye.